Okay, let's go ahead and get started for today. We've got a couple more tile-based lectures to get through. This one's going to be short on the lecture, but we are going to write some code together tonight. And then next class, it's going to be a little bit longer on the lecture, but you'll kind of see where it's going. So let's get started with what we're going to do today. So what we are going to do today, let me switch over so I can tell you that. This is class 11. This is the third class where we're talking about tile-based worlds and making games out of that. But the previous examples we've done in the previous two lectures, and if you are behind on any of those, go back and watch those. The first tile-based worlds kind of one lecture, we did examples 1, 2, and 3. And those were all posted to the course site. So a simple example of rendering the tile-based map, adding a player, and having the player interact with the map, and then storing that map as a string or as data so that rather than hard coding it, writing code to do it. And then the previous class, Tile-Based Worlds 2, class 10, we added physics simulations, so it could be like a side view where things would fall off platforms and bounce off walls. We then optimized our tile collision detection a little bit, so rather than checking every tile on the screen, we only check the ones around the area of interest that we're doing collision on. And then we used file IO to load the map from a file. In other words, that way we could change the file, it would change the game. So just like any kind of moddable game, we could then have different levels in files. We could have downloadable content later if we wanted to, or somebody who makes an editor and edits that without having to rewrite the code. We just change the data in the file. Now we're going to continue that a little bit tonight. The first thing we're going to do, we're going to do two examples tonight. The first one, we're going to add textures to that tile map file. And then we are going to kind of make a tile map module and make that code that we wrote more kind of object-oriented and a little more universal. So kind of like having there, that's a little bit better. You can see me better there. But more like having an engine that we've created that does that stuff. All right, so let's go ahead and write some code. So let's switch over to where we can see that code real quick. And let's start with where we left off last time. So we left off with this tile 6 example last time. And you'll notice the code I have in there, those big comment things, blocks of comments that I had put in there to kind of show. Here, let me make this so we can see the entire screen. Put that up there. Let me pull this down. Okay, there we go. And so you can see the new things that I added here, the tile map from file for this one. I'm going to continue that process today, but before we do that, let's look at where we left off with things. So we left off, we were loading the tile map from a file, and we have this example that looks like this. And there's the eyeball. It can run back and forth. It's got physics. It bounces. It can jump, fall off platforms. It interacts with the things by bouncing off of them right now. We don't know what we're hitting right now, but we know that we can bounce off things and hit things. And that map was loaded from the file. And let's take a quick look at what that file looks like. Let me see if I can jump back up there. Hold on. This is irrelevant to the lecture, but there we go. And then jump up there. And let's see if I can get all the way back to the top again. Jump up there. Oh, jump up. It's harder than it looks. Jump up here. Jump up there. Jump up there. And then finally up there. And we're done. So it takes a little bit of skill, but you'll notice the friction when we're on the ground slows us down. Gravity pulls us down. Jump adds that upward force. Or spacebar adds that upward force, and we're jumping. And that's where we left off with example 6. And that came from a file. Let's open that file and look at what it looks like. So that file was in here, and it's in map.txt. Let's edit that real quick, and you can see what that looks like. I should just be able to double click it, bring it up in Notepad, and there's what that file looks like. So notice we put B1 in there. Make the font a little bigger. So we put B1 in there, means brick 1. L1 means ladder, and so forth. And so we could actually, if we wanted other textures, we could load up brick texture type 2, ladder texture 2. If we wanted grass, we could do G1. If we wanted little trees or water, W1 or whatever. And if we had different kinds of water, W1, W2, W3, we could do whatever we want. but notice that it's really just stored in the file. And the way we loaded that from the file, notice, was each line that had a line of the map said map line equal, and it had just the string that had the right number of characters that made up the picture of the map. And we just have multiple map lines here. They all kind of get joined together in our load from file, and then we into a big string, and then we passed that string on to the function we made earlier to get the map from the string. So the load tile map from file was relatively simple. We open the file, read all the lines, and then we go through all the lines. If the line is a map line, we add it to our map string, and then by the time we're done, we return, we call tile map from string, which we had used earlier. We do the strip to get rid of the new line at the end. That goes into the tile map from string, which then returns to us the map. And then we return that map just like that. So in other words, we made a version rather than from string. It got it from a file, but it still built the string and used that one there. So we could have repeated all this code in here, but to keep it simple, we already had a thing. We just used it. So the only real new code we added was this stuff here. And then the line that actually just called where we were loading that from the file right down here. Maybe this should have had that on there as well. But that was it, and the rest of the code worked the same. So our main loop, very simple, and so forth. So what we want to add today, let's just quickly look back at the stuff we want to add today. We want to add a couple things to this. The first one is getting the textures from the file as well. Because notice right now, if we want to get everything that's used from the file, right now, the map, B1, L1, how those are organized comes from the file. But notice that we're still doing this here. We're still making this texture, the tile map textures. We're still doing that here. And so we're going to start today on making this a little bit more object oriented. And not only that, but we're also then going to eventually put this into its own module. So let's get started with that. The first thing I want to do to get started with that is I'm going to do a save as on this. I'm going to call this, oops. Let me switch over so you can see what I'm doing. The first thing I'm going to do is make this say tiles 7. And the thing that we're going to do first is we're going to start making this into an object. So, oop, tile map. So this is what we're adding. And I'm going to, here, I'll put a plus sign by this so you can tell what we're adding. We're adding that. And then we're also going to add a plus sign here that says get textures from file. Oops. So those are the two things. Those are the two things that we're going to do today. So with tile 7, let's get started on making it a little bit object-oriented at first. So to do that, essentially notice that this is just a bunch of functions down here that are dealing with this stuff. And notice that separate from those functions, we have this tile map thing that we're keeping track of. And then we have this tile map textures things. Well, those are all related. So why don't we gather all those together inside of a class? And so inside of a class, let's start with that. So I'm going to make a class, and I'm going to call it tile map. And then underneath that, I am going to indent all of these. And then since this isn't going to be new code, let me take out all of these bunch of things I have over here. So I'm just going to do a search and replace. I'm going to do, that's not what I want. I'm going to go to edit. I'm going to go to replace. And I put those in as a bunch of that. And I'm just going to replace all those. I'll do replace all. All right, so that should have got rid of all those comment lines showing what was new here. And we can add in things if we want to show what we're adding that's new. But essentially what we're going to do is we're going to collect all of the functions that deal with that tile map. We're going to indent all of those as part of this. Now I'm not going to include render eye because that's for the eye. That's not part of the tile map right now. So I'm going to do that. And I'm going to indent that over. So now all of these functions, I may have gone too far. Let me see. Yeah, I went too far, so let me de-dent that. So to indent and de-dent things, notice you can highlight a block of text and then use Control left bracket or right bracket, the square brackets. And now that's all indented underneath it. Now, there's one thing we need to do though, is we're going to need a constructor. We're going to need that. And we're also going to need to put self at the beginning of each of these, and we're going to change some of these around a little bit. Before we do that, let's add our constructor. Now our constructor, I'm going to use that to hold my tile map, the tile map itself, that we're using down here, and I'm also going to use it to hold these textures. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to move these two things inside of that constructor up here. So there's the constructor. And notice a couple things about this. We're eventually going to get those from that. But since the tile map textures here, I want to be part of this object instance that gets created from this. I'm going to do a self dot in front of that. And I'm actually going to do that on all these. And I'm going to make the tile map part of this thing as well. So I'm going to leave these alone for right now as we make this object. We're going to come back and add these so it gets those from the file in a second. And notice that this map.txt, it's hard-coded right now. We're eventually going to change it out. So when I say create a new tile map object, I can pass in the file that I want, and it's automatically going to pull the textures out of it, automatically going to pull the map out of it, and then create that tile map for us. So we'll leave it like it is now. Until we get that working. Now, before I do anything else and before I forget, I'm going to do a save as. I'm going to save this as tiles 7. So now we have that. Now we need to go through each of these things that we indented and make it so that it uses the right thing. So this tile map from file, I'm going to put a self there. And then here, this is going to have to be self.tilemap from file. And I guess we don't need that there. That's a function, so we need a self comma there. And the file name, everything else in here is okay, except, yeah, so this should all be okay. Now this one, we need self in front of this. But here, when we're creating this local tile map, that's okay because that's just returning it. Down here, render tile map, this needs to be self.tilemap. Rest of that should be okay. But the tile map textures down here, this needs to be a self.tilemap. That needs to be a self.tilemap textures. This needs to be self.tilemap textures. And then this one for the collision, we need a self in front of all these. And we may have missed a few of these here and there. We'll fix that in a second. Okay, so I think all that's good now. All right, now before we go too much further, let's go ahead and just create one of these tile map instance here. And down here, where we're calling check tile map collision, that's going to be part of something that we call, let's see, did we add self to all those? Let's see if we did. Nope, we need self on this. Okay, so we added self to each of those. Okay. So now we're ready to actually create one of these tile map things in here. So here where we had that code before, I'm going to just say tile map equal tile map. So they were creating an instance of that tile map called Tilemap. And to make it clear that that's an instance, let's say tilemap1 equal tilemap. So this is like the maybe level 1 or something like that that we were loading the tile map from. And then down here, instead of render tilemap, we need to do tilemap1 dot to render it. And then up here where we're checking the collision, we need to do tilemap1 for each of those places where we're touching that object. Now we probably have some things that we did wrong here, but that's a good start. Let's see what happens. We already did a save as, so we should be okay to just run it. Okay, we have a problem. Tilemap from string is not defined on line 37, so we missed one of the self things somewhere. So let's look at line 37. All right, so right here, self.tilemap from string. All right, let's try again. Now line 139, we missed the instance name on that. So let's see, 139 is down here. Here. So we need a tilemap1 dot on that one. And there we go. And this works just like it did, but now we have the tilemap stuff kind of gathered together in an object. Now the advantage of that is, notice that in my main program, I'm only interacting with everything that's gathered together in that tilemap. So I'm calling the collision function inside of that tilemap object instance. I'm calling the render tilemap from inside there, and everything else is kind of gathered together inside of it. So in other words, now the textures and the tilemap are all kind of grouped together in one thing. Now that we've made that into an object a little bit, let's get these tilemap textures to actually come from that same file. So in other words, in order to do that, the thing that we want to do is essentially, rather than having these hard-coded, I want to be able to pass in the name of the map file. So let's do that first. So here in the constructor, I'm going to say file name. And in here, I'm going to say self.filename. And I'm actually going to make a thing for that. So self.filename equal file name. And the reason I'm storing off the file name is that way if I ever in the future write something that needs to resave that map file for some reason, I know what file name it was loaded under. So I'm saving off the file name when I create this thing, and then I'll know that. And down here, when I load it, I'm going to load it from whatever the file name was that was set. So that means when I create this, the instance of this, I need to pass in the file name. So up here, I'm going to say map.text. Now, that should not change anything. Let's run it and make sure it doesn't. And here it is, and it still works the same way that it worked before. We can jump, we can fall, we can walk on the platform, whatever. It's harder than it looks. There we go. There we go. Oops. There we go. And there we go. All right. Cool. Okay, so now we're back to our code, and the next thing that I wanted to do was to load these textures from the file as well. So we don't want that hard code. We want it so we could have another file that has different textures in it. So notice there's two pieces of data we need to get out of this. This B1 and the name of the file. So in other words, the name of the texture graphics file and what we're storing it in the texture dictionary as, or the 2-character symbol that we're storing that as. So what we're going to do is we're going to edit our file format. So let's go back to that file format that we opened earlier. So here's this file format. We have the map lines, but I'm also going to add, here I'll add a thing that's like load texture. And the way that I'm going to store that is I'm going to store that, and let me move this aside so you can kind of see what it was we were after. We were after having B1. So I'm going to store here B1, comma, brick.jpg. So that's the way I'm going to store these textures. And there's two textures I want to load. I'm going to want to load that one. And so B1, I'm going to want to store L1, which was, again, looking at our code, ladder.jpg. I guess it's brick1.jpg and ladder.jpg. So brick1.jpg and ladder, not labber, ladder.jpg. All right, and here, let me move this up so you can kind of see what there's those same lines there. We're having that, so it loads those things from the file. Now, it doesn't do that automatically right now. We need to add that code to our load or tile map from file. That's the function right below this one. So to add that, let me go ahead and do a save on this. So if I save this right now, I'm not going to really do anything, but let's go back to our code. So we want this stuff where those things get loaded to not happen in here, but to happen down here in this thing when we go through these lines. So here we have this if key equal map line, we have what to do. But we also now need to have an elif key equal, and instead of map line, if you remember what we had with that, let's look at that file one more time. You'll notice that we had load texture. Load texture. So if the key is load texture, then what we're going to do is we're going to do something like this code here where we added those things. But before we do that, we need to know what two character symbol we're putting in the dictionary and then what file we're putting it under. And to get that, that has to come from this file. And in our thing, it's in the right-hand side of that, which you'll notice, if you remember, that was the value part of that when we split on the equal sign. So how are we going to get those two parts out of that? Well, we're going to do another split on that and split it into that and that. And then we're going to load those two things in. So we got to do that first here. So we're going to take the value part of this and we're going to do a split on that. And we're going to split based on a comma. Why the comma? Well, remember that's how that's stored in our file. Brick or B1 comma. So we're splitting that. So the first half of that we're going to get the B1. And the second half we're going to get the file name. So we're going to put that in as texture key and texture file name. So down here, this is going to become texture key. And over here, this is going to be texture file name. So if we come across that load texture, we're going to get we're going to split it on the comma, or split what was on the right-hand side of the equal on the comma. The first part's going to become the two symbol key. The second part is going to become the file name. All right, let's run that and see if it actually works. And notice there it is. And notice now I could load up different textures if I wanted to. So if I wanted to switch around what texture did what here, I'm still loading the eye separately, but that's okay because that's not really part of the tiles. That's just a character that's kind of on top of that. But notice that if I want to switch that around and load something different, I don't know if I have anything else in that. Bricks, eye, ladder. Here, let me see if I have a. I don't think I have any other textures handy, but let's do this. Let me just change that texture file around and save it. You can see what I'm talking about here. So here, rather than B1, watch what happens if I change that to L1 and this to B1. So I just switched which one was B1 and which one was L1. Let's do a Control S to save, and let's rerun our program. And that did not work. Let me see why. Maybe I never saved it. Hold on. All right, for some reason that never saved. All right, let's try it again. So now just by switching those, now we get ladders everywhere except for where the bricks are down here. And notice that was just by loading the textures differently. And we could load other textures in there if we wanted to as well. So for example, we could have the eyeball running around on eyes, but notice I don't have to edit the code to do that. I can just go to this and I could say, let's change this back to B1. And let's make that L1 again, but let's make this I dot, I think it was PNG. Oops. Oh. And now you have the eyeball running around on a maze of other eyeballs. It's camouflaged. Or if I wanted to make another kind of texture, let's edit a texture real quick and make a new kind to use. So let me go ahead and let me go back to that folder. In here, in there, tile examples. So let me go ahead and edit the brick texture. So let me do a open with, let's see, let's do paint.net. All right, so there's my brick texture there. So I'm going to edit this brick texture, and I'm going to do something really simple. I'm just going to say adjustments. Let's change the hue of it and make kind of some greenish bricks, or maybe here, let's cancel that. And let's do adjustments. Let's add a hue and saturation level rather than a conditional one. So we can just drag the hue around to get different colors. Let's make a blue, some blue bricks. Say okay. And then let's do a save as. Do a file save as. And let's save it as brick2.jpg. Okay, so we saved that as brick2. There it is there. And so now notice, in order to add another texture type in here, let's say we want the outline border to be in blue bricks. So, or maybe just one of the platforms will be blue. So let's do load texture equal. Let's do b2, comma, brick2.jpg. And let's just make this platform here have blue bricks. So b2, 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 b2. And let's do a Control S on that and save it. And let's go back and run this. And notice I didn't edit any code. No code changed. But now we have that other texture that we created down here with the blue bricks. And in our game, what we could do is we could make it so the blue bricks are like icy and slippery, so the friction is lower on them or something like that. Or we could make, if we wanted to, we could make like a little TNT explosive chest or something like that if we wanted to. So for example, we'll do something cheesy with this. Let's go back to this guy. Let's pick a paintbrush. Here, let's make this black. Like a red, maybe. Like a dark red. And let's do T. And this is awful artwork, by the way, but and then another T. All right. So let's do a save on that. Close that. Go back to our code, and now when we run this, it'll be blue bricks that have like TNT spray painted all over them. And I don't know if you can see that easily or not, but it's down there. So now maybe when you jump into those, they explode. We don't have any of that working yet. We just have the textures being able to be edited. Okay, so now we added the ability to load the textures from the file. And notice the cool thing about that is everything is stored in that we need for a level is stored in that file. And notice if I want to load a different level, that becomes easy to do now. So notice I could just do a save as and do, let's save this as map2.txt. And now I could change around this level here. And instead of having B2 here, I could put B1, 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 and let's put a ladder coming up here, maybe on top of this, L1, oops, L1, L1, B2, let's make an opening here. Maybe like that. Let's make an opening over here. And so now notice the level is different. Still loading the same textures, but the level itself is different. So now we can do a save on that. And now notice how easy it is in my code to load. There's map. We just changed that. And let's run that again with map just for a second. I think I messed up and loaded that behind it. So running that. So there's our normal map. Everything works. And if I want to change to the other map, notice how easy that is to do in my code. Just say map 2. Or, nope, map 2. And we screwed up, hold on. That's supposed to be a 1. All right, so we just changed that one thing, and now we have that other map that looks different. And in fact, we could make it so that when you're playing the game and you complete this level, it loads the next map. In fact, we could bind a key to that. Let's do that real quick. So let's go ahead and load up map, just normal map.txt here. But I'm going to take all of that code there, and I'm going to make it so if you press the key, let's say if keys subscript pygame.k underscore, let's put it to 2. Then we load level 2. And let's do the same thing so we can switch back and forth between level 1 and level 2. Now this could create some problems for us, namely being if we're in a place on one map that has a block on the other map, that could create some problems, but we'll go and leave it right like that for now. So I press the 2, I get the other map, I press the 1, hold on, I press the 1, it goes back to map 1. So there's the 2, loads map 2, there's the 1, loads map 1, and I can kind of just switch back and forth between those, and notice that those are coming from the file each time, which would allow you to have the code where you finish one level, it loads the next one. You finish that level, it loads map 3. You finish level map 3, it loads map 4, and so forth. But that ability to very quickly switch between things and have it all be done through the files and not have to rewrite the code is a really powerful thing towards us making something like an engine out of this. Now, there are weird things that can happen. So, for example, if I'm going to go down and stand on, here, I'm going to move down here and stand right there. And notice that in this spot down here, that TNT brick shows up. Well, something bad can happen because I could move where that brick is and then switch the map, and now I'm inside it and now I'm stuck. And maybe you have played a game where you get stuck in the map somehow, like part of your body gets into the map and then you're stuck. We would have to come up with a way that if those things are colliding, I don't have a previous position to move it back to. I can't change the dx and dy. So the idea here is we'd probably move it in a direction until it was no longer stuck in the map. So it would kind of migrate and pop out of the map. Or we would just set it up so that that never happens, where we're teleported into a place. Notice there's several places that can happen here. I could also do that down here with that ladder, and now I'm stuck. I cannot get out of that ladder. But I'm sure you've played a game where that if the place does not happen, we're okay. In fact, even where the texture changes, like up here on those TNT bricks, let's go up there for a second. Right here, that's no problem. I can still move on those just fine. The only problem is when I'm embedded inside of the map in some way. I have no previous position to move to when it says there's a collision. And so we could have a secondary collision check that basically says, if after moving to your old position and changing the dx and dy, if you're still in the map, then kind of keep going in a direction until you're out of the map. Or we just set it up so that never happens. Okay, so we now are loading the textures from that, and we made this object-oriented to some extent. And that is program 7. So we got that working. Now I want to do one more thing for program 8, and that's to make the object-oriented part of this a little bit cleaner. So I'm going to go and do a file save as. We're going to save this under tiles 8. And for tiles 8, we did that one. And we're going to add a little bit more universal tile setup. And actually, let me go ahead and make this its own comment here with a plus sign here. And what do I mean by universal tile setup? Notice that we're making some assumptions down here in our code. That in our code, we're always assuming that the number of tiles wide and tall is the same. And we're also making an assumption here that the size of those tiles is always 32 by 32. And that might not be the case. We might not want to have larger tiles or smaller tiles or something like that. We want them all to be uniform. So what I'm going to do to make this a little more uniform is up here. For right now, I'm going to say self.tile width equal 32 and self.tile height equal 32. So we've got a 32 by 32 thing, but everywhere we have the width and the height of those, I'm going to go ahead and replace those in my code down here. So anywhere I see that 32, like here, I'm going to do self.tile. Now that's columns, so that's going across, so that's going to be tile width. So that needs to be tile width. This needs to be tile width. That needs to be tile width. Anywhere we have the X, it's going to be tile width. Tile width. This is columns, so that's tile width. That's row, that one's not. All right, so that should be it for tile width. Now we've got to do the same thing for tile height. So here's our self.tile height. And down here for setting our tile height, anywhere where we have that, where we had the 32 and or a row, this is going to be self.tileHeight. That's going to be self.tileHeight. That's going to be self.tileHeight. And then down here, that's a row, so that's tile height. This is Y, that's tile height. That's tile height. And now as one other thing, right here where we had 31 before, this one is going to have to, that's going to have to change too, because that needs to be one less than what we had before. So tile height -1. And just to make that clear, I'll put those in parentheses, even though that doesn't really matter. And this one is going to be tile width -1. Oops. And now we have something where we can use different sized tiles. But you'll notice that there's one other thing that's hard-coded right now, and that's how many rows, how many tiles wide and how many tiles tall our world is. But let's, before we make any other changes, let's make sure this still works. And notice that still works as expected. We can still load and save things. And all that's great. But now we have something where rather than having that always be 32 and have 32 throughout our code, we can set the size of that as we want to. Now, one other change we're going to make today, and then we're going to stop. I want to keep the lecture here relatively short tonight, is that how many tiles wide and how many tiles tall is it? So I'm going to call that map width and map height. Now, right now today, we're not going to make it so the map can be bigger than the screen, but we are going to set up for that next class. The next class, what we're going to do is we're going to look at, okay, how do I, number one, how can I add these things to my file so I could get different size maps? But number two, I'm going to look at, okay, how do I, next class, how do I also make it so I can scroll around in this large map? And we're going to look at that next class as well. We're just going to prime ourselves for that today. So let's look at, where do we have it hard-coded for how many rows and columns? Okay, well, there's an 18. 18 was the number of rows. 25 was the number of columns. So in this case, that 18, that's going to be our self.map height. And this 25 is self.map width. And I suppose before we go and change that, let's go up here and change those. So map width was 25, map height was 18. So here's a 25, that's self.map width. There's an 18, self.map height. There's a 25, self.map width. And that should be it. So let's run that. And we screwed something up. It says it doesn't have map height or map width. Let's look at that. Map height, H-E-I-G-H-T. What line did we get that on? Let me look at that again. That's line 50. Why is it not finding that? Oh, I need to change the order of these around. That's why. Because that runs in the order that they're in here. So I just need to set all those things and put the thing where I load the file up below it. There we go. Okay, so that works. There's 1, there's 2. The map change still works, but now notice I could change the width and the height, and that would give me the ability then to load a different size map if I wanted to. Right now, we aren't doing anything to make anything any different. It's hard to jump up there. Hold on. There we go. There we go. And fall off there, jump up there, jump up there, jump up there. All right. So at this point, I think that we're going to stop there for the night, but we added the textures and load those from the file. We added this OOP, object-oriented programming version of the tile map. In other words, we gathered all of it together in here. The last thing that I'm going to do today is, and I'll go and make this a program 8 to show that, but the last thing I want to do here is I want to make it so that this entire thing could be loaded in its own module. So to have this be its own module that we import rather than having the tilemap class stuck inside of here, notice we could just take all of this code that does the tilemap stuff. I'll do a Control X on that. And I'm going to make that import tilemap. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say File New, and let's call it tilemap underscore module, just to make it clear that that's what we're doing here. So I'm going to say File, New File. I'm going to paste all that code into there. And now there is one change we're going to have to make here to get this to work, which we'll see in a second. But I'm going to do a File Save As on this. Let me make sure you can see what I'm doing here. So File, Save As, tilemap underscore module.py. Now, the one change we need, you'd think that that might work like it is, but there's one thing, actually a couple things we're going to need to do. Notice that crashes. It says tilemap is not defined, and that's because it's inside of this tilemap module, just like rand int is inside of rand and other things are inside of other things. What we're going to do is when we call that tilemap function, we need to do tilemap module.tilemap. Now, there's one other change we're going to need to make as well, and that's that Pygame is not defined inside of that tilemap module. So we're going to need Pygame in there, and we're also going to need access to the display surface in some way. Let's go and add the Pygame import Pygame at the top of this because it needs it. So we know we need that. Save that. Go back to this. And actually, this should probably be saved under 9. Okay, let's run that. And notice the display surface is not defined. And that's because each of the modules that you load is stored under its own, in its own space. Now there's a couple ways we could fix this. One is how we import this, but a better way to still keep it modular like that is we need a way to tell the tilemap module what the display surface is. And the easiest way to deal with that is going to be, let's go back to the tilemap module code, is to have that passed in. We pass in the file name, and we're going to pass in the display surface. for rendering on. And inside of here, I'm going to say self.ds equal display surface. And now anywhere down in my code down through here that I'm doing something, which there only are a couple places that I'm touching that, and that's here where I'm rendering. So here, I just do self.ds, and there, self.ds. And really, that's it. That's all that only places I was doing that. But that means when I create this tile map object, I need to pass in the display surface to it. So let's do a Control S on that. Let's go back to our tiles 8 code, or actually it's supposed to be tiles 9. Let me do a file save as. So that means when I create that, which is up at the top here, right there, I need to pass in the display surface that's going to write everything onto. And there we go. And there it is, and it works just like it did before, but now we have this code module that we could use for anything. And in fact, I wouldn't even necessarily have to pass the display surface to it. So notice it's all kind of self-contained in its own module. I don't necessarily have to pass the that display surface to it. I could pass a different surface to it to get it to render this on something, another surface. Then I could scale it down and make something like a mini map if I wanted to. There are a whole lot of things that we could do here with this, but that's the basic idea. We now have a tile map module that we're going to extend next class to include larger map sizes than just the one that we're using now. Okay, so that's it for today. I will post all of the code on there. So you can, up on the course site, so you can play with it if you need to. And other than that, let's switch back to the presentation just for a second here. So we went through that code. We made several examples tonight. We had the textures. We made it object-oriented. And actually, I think I need to change those numbers. Hold on a second. Let me fix that real quick. So we were here, 6. This should have a 7. Actually, this was 7. And then 8 was and then we made a module out of it. So those are the 3 new examples. I'll go ahead and let me do a save on that. And an F5. So we did those 3 new examples. We wrote the code for it. That's all for today. I'll post that code. And next class, we're going to do something cool. And if you've played a game like Terraria, where there's a really large world, and you have your characters, and they can go around and actually interact with the tiles and mine down and cut out stuff in the ground, and there's things flying around on that. We're very close to that. The one piece of that we don't have right now is how do I make a large world and have it scroll around where we are. And it would actually be really easy to create a game kind of like Terraria where you mine and it changes the map. Or any other kind of game like a really large platformer or side scroller using this technique. We're going to look at how to create a really large world by knitting those tiles together next class. One other thing that's worth mentioning is next week is our spring break. And when we come back from spring break, we are going to have our midterm exam. And then after midterm exam, we've got one more assignment I have planned for you that I'm probably going to give you next class. And what I want to do next class is give you that additional assignment. It's going to be a tile-based thing. We have a little character that runs around. Maybe you have to get a key, open a door and stuff like that, climb ladders. We'll add the additional stuff for that for that next lab, maybe next class. It might be after the spring break. I'm not sure yet. I might let you just work on your spring break stuff, but we are going to have that midterm exam. So look for the announcement for that. It'll probably be next class when I make that announcement, but it'll probably be right when we get back from spring break. All right, so that's it for what we're going to cover today. Everybody stay safe, wash your hands, wear a mask. If you're around strangers, try not to be, unless you're socially distanced. And everybody stay safe, and I'll see you next time. If you have any questions or you're working on your labs and you're stuck, need help with code, let me know.